Afghanistan has often been called the crossroads of Central Asia. It is bordered by Pakistan in the south and in the east, Iran in the west, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan in the north, and China in the far northeast. Afghanistan has been the product of many overlapping cultures and has been the focal point for invasion and migration for thousands of years. They are one of the poorest nations in Asia due to decades of war and lack of foreign investments. It is a nation that has been affected by external pressures and internal disturbances for thousands of years. Afghanistan truly owes its history to its position on the map. Afghanistan's neocolonial history arguably began between 331 and 327 BC when Alexander the Great defeated the Emperor Darius III and squashed local resistance. Alexander and his successors, the Seleucids, were known for bringing many Greek cultural influences to the region. Shortly after Alexander the Great's ruling, the Mauryan Empire of India gained control of southern Afghanistan as part of an alliance treaty. They were largely known for bringing with them the religion of Buddhism and occupied the nation until about 185 BC. In the 3rd century BC, nomadic Kushans established an empire that became a cultural and commercial center in Afghanistan. From the end of the Kushan Empire in the 3rd century AD until the 7th century, the region was fragmented and under the general protection of the Iranian Sassanian Empire. In 642 AD, the Arabs invaded the entire region and introduced Islam. Arab rule eventually gave way to the Persians, who controlled the area until they were conquered in 998 by the Turkic. Following the short-lived dynasty, various princes attempted to rule sections of the country until the Mongol invasion of 1219, led by Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan eventually died in 1227, and a succession of petty chiefs and princes struggled for supremacy until the late 14th century, when one of Genghis Khan's descendants, Tamerlane, incorporated Afghanistan into his own vast Asian empire. In 1504, the region fell under a new empire, the Mughals of northern India, who for the next 2 centuries contested Afghan territory with the Iranian Safavi dynasty. 1747 might be the most important date in Afghanistan's history. During this year, Ahmad Shah Durrani unified the Pashtun tribes and created the Durrani Empire, which is considered the beginning of the modern Afghanistan. The Durrani began a period of normal rule in Afghanistan that would surprisingly be present till 1978. After about 100 years, Ahmad Shah's Durrani Empire would face forces driven by imperialism, which would lead to what is recognized in history as the Great Game. The Great Game was a century-long fight for the domination of Central Asia and Afghanistan. It was between Russia and Britain, and it eventually led to 2 major Anglo-Afghan Great Wars. The First Afghan War took place in 1838. The British demanded that Afghanistan shun any contact with Russia or Iran, and that it hand over its vast tracts of Pashtun-inhabited land to British India, regions that are today known as Pakistan. Dost Muhammad, the Afghan ruler, agreed to these humiliating demands. But the British still invaded the country. The British seized most of the major cities in Afghanistan with little resistance, but their heavy-handed rule soon resulted in a popular uprising by the people, which resulted in the massacre of the entire British army of 15,000. As Russian forces approached the northern border of Afghanistan in 1878, the British invaded Afghanistan for the second time and held most of Afghanistan in what is known as the Second Afghan War. Again, the British were able to occupy all major cities. But unlike last time, the British got wind of an impending rebellion against their occupation and brutally crushed it in a preemptive move. The British set up rule and forced their country to hand over control of its foreign affairs to Britain. The British secured the Durand Line in 1893, dividing Afghanistan from the British colonial territory, and basically planted the seeds for future tensions over the division of the Pashtun tribes. Afghanistan would remain neutral in World War I and a British protectorate until 1919. Following the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 and the wave of popular rebellions that rippled through Asia, Afghanistan, along with its current king Amanullah, decided to declare the country's full independence by signing a treaty of aid and friendship with Lenin of Russia, declaring war on Britain, which is sometimes referred to as the Third Afghan War. After a brief period of border skirmishes and the bombing of Kabul by the Royal Air Force, Britain acknowledged Afghan's independence, and Emmanuel introduced Afghan's first constitution in 1923. In 1933, Emmanuel's nephew, Muhammad Zahir Shah, would be the last king of Afghanistan. He would control Afghanistan for the next 40 years, bringing stability to the country. After World War II, in which Afghanistan remained neutral, the long-standing division of the Pashtun tribes created a great amount of tension within. In 1947, Britain fully withdraws from neighboring countries, which creates a largely uncontrollable border. In response, Afghanistan shifted its foreign policy towards the Soviet Union in an attempt to regain order. Afghanistan, along with its current king Muhammad Shah, were cautiously reformist, modernizing and centralizing the government while strengthening ties with the Soviet Union. A new constitution, ratified in 1964, liberalized somewhat of the constitutional monarchy that did not seem to be helping Afghanistan economically. However, in the ensuing decade, economic and political conditions still worsened. In 1973, Muhammad Dawud Khan overthrew the king and established a republic. Even then, economic conditions did not improve, and he as well lost most of his political support. And in 1978, communist factions overthrew the government of Afghanistan. In 1979, the threat of tribal urgency against the communist government triggered an invasion by 80,000 Soviet troops, who then endured a very effective decade-long guerrilla war. Between 1979 and 1989, two Soviet-sponsored regiments failed to defeat the guerrillas. In 1988, the Soviet Union agreed to create a neutral Afghan state, and the last Soviet Union troops left Afghanistan in 1989. The agreement ended a war that killed thousands, devastated an industry, devastated agriculture, and created 5 to 6 million refugees. The agreement did not settle the differences between the government and opposition groups, and in 1992, Afghanistan descended into a civil war that further ravaged the economy. Struggles among the armed groups continued until one Islamic fundamentalist group, the Taliban, gained control of most of the country in 1996. The Taliban used an extremist form of Islam to assert control over society. The economy remained in ruins, and most of the government services ceased. The Taliban granted the Arab terrorist organization al-Qaeda the right to use Afghanistan as a base. As al-Qaeda continued to commit a series of international terrorist acts, including the attacks on the United States on September 11, 2001, the Taliban rejected international pressure to surrender al-Qaeda leaders, and in response, the United States and allies attacked Afghanistan in the fall of 2001. The Taliban government collapsed, but the Taliban and al-Qaeda leaders escaped. The United States led an international security assistance force and began the occupation that is still in place today. In December 2004, Hamid Karzai became the first democratically elected president of Afghanistan. The National Assembly was inaugurated the following December. However, regional warlords in large areas of Afghanistan remain to this day out of the control of Afghan government. Serious challenges lay ahead for the government of Afghanistan and the United States as well.